All right, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and today we will finally be discussing Star Wars Visions. So sorry, so sorry for the delay, but I really wanted to get this right. Visions was my most anticipated project, aside from Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, obviously, and I'm happy to announce it did not disappoint. I've always thought that anime and Star Wars go together so well with art style, character focus, and creative action. And while I'd love to talk about all of the short films included in Visions, I really wanted to focus on one in particular. Visions accomplished two things for me. One, it got me excited for the future of Star Wars, away from our beloved Skywalker Saga timeline and characters, something we cling to so often to a fault. And Star Wars is just such a vast galaxy that deserves to be explored and cannot be tied down anymore. But in the same breath, it needs to retain its core themes and elements to still feel like Star Wars. And that is exactly where the thesis of this episode will be. What is Star Wars? The second thing Visions did for me that I did not expect at all, and that was make me question what Star Wars truly is at its core. Now, of course, that is different for everyone and how they connect to the story individually. But our gurus, George and Dave, explain there is a thread of themes that string Star Wars stories together. Before Visions, I could have given you why I love Star Wars, though it would have been hard to wrap up into a nice, pretty statement. But I don't think I truly contemplated what Star Wars was at its center, and why it continuously brought me back. That was until I saw The Village Bride. The Village Bride was far and away my favorite Visions episode, and that mostly comes from its themes and simplicity. While I loved Ninth Jedi for its fresh story and really cool twist, and plenty of others for their creativity and the homage they pay to the source material, Village Bride stuck out to me because it didn't rely on being, if you could see me, I'm air quoting, being Star Wars. Whether this was intentional or not, I think it very much was. Village Bride does not lean on its Star Wars heritage until the last 3 minutes, maybe 5, of the entire film. I think this was a conscious decision by the creators to put Star Wars under the microscope by stripping away everything that is familiar to it. By leaving it in this most pure state without any window dressing, Village Bride is able to tell you what Star Wars is without explicitly spelling it out with lightsabers, the Force, the Jedi, the Sith, the dark side, the light side, because at the end of the day, those are just there to fill out the story and make it more interesting. Now, some people might argue that the probe droid, the battle droids, the lasers, and the mentions of empires and separatists, masters and apprentices automatically solidify that this is a Star Wars story early on. I'd refute that by saying that those are not inherent to Star Wars, but to sci-fi itself. Star Wars owns none of those images or terms. Robots and lasers all have a home in most sci-fi stories. And, well, the political factions are just political factions. Some might say, oh, what about the haircutting scene, the Padawan haircutting scene when F takes the knife and cuts off her old little Padawan thing? As I mentioned in my Japanese influences on Star Wars episode a couple weeks ago, go check it out if you haven't. Haircutting rituals were an influence on Star Wars itself, not the other way around. And were seen in anime and even in a couple of these Visions episodes, which I'm going to pat myself on the back for, because I heavily discussed it. It was one of my biggest talking points in the episode, and it made it in a big way. So yes, good job me. Yes. But I think my favorite example of the idea that Village Bride showed that it was Star Wars before the ending was when F was lifting a rock in the woods before the final showdown. F is the main character's name. It's not explicitly said, but it's out there. Her name is F, just the letter F. This scene immediately reminded me of Luke in The Last Jedi when he said, "The Force is not just about lifting rocks." Similarly, Star Wars is not just about lifting rocks. This scene, once again, I am speculating, seems to directly call out that fallacy that because she's lifting a rock, that's the Force, and that's Star Wars. And I'd argue, no. That is not Star Wars at its core. It's almost like the creators breaking that fourth wall and almost joking about it. Like, oh, rocks, it's all about lifting rocks, right? Wrong. Now again, I could totally be gassing up the creators right now, but I truly believe the decision to wait till the end, when the character finally finds clarity and reveals herself, as the music swells and says, "May the Force be with you," that was when the creators wanted to take the blindfold off the viewer. Even the Force throughout the whole thing is referred to as Magina. While I believe that's a world-building tactic, I also think it kind of plays into this idea that this is a Star Wars story, but I'm not going to tell you it's a Star Wars story until the very end. On the world-building aspect, I do love when remote planets have their own words for things that are like common to us. It makes the galaxy feel real and more lived in. The creators, I assume, wanted to tell a Star Wars story in the most organic way possible. So what I've done is compiled what themes the Village Bride tackles, masterfully, I might add, and how those themes can answer the question, what is Star Wars? Which I think has become extremely important moving forward, because when we leave the Skywalker Saga in the near future, the familiar, similar to how the Village Bride dispenses of the familiar Star Wars imagery, what are we left with? What will make these new Star Wars stories connect the way the past 40 years have? Let's get into it. Number 1, self-reflection. The backbone of this story is the main character F's troubled past and how it has scarred her emotionally and, as we can see later on, physically. Short films do not present much exposition, which I really enjoy because it lets the audience be a participant and you get to draw your own conclusions. From the flashbacks and conversations with the older man, we can tell that F lost her master in some traumatic event. We are given some blurry visuals, some vague dialogue, but based on her actions, we piece together that she failed in some capacity, whether it was by her lack of action to protect or save her master, or others around him. Regardless, F's mask is her sign of shame. She can't bear to take it off. Throughout the film, by observing the people of the village and their connection to the planet and nature, F begins the process of healing by learning from them. The ceremony in the beginning of the film serves as a thesis for the remainder. You cannot change the flow of the river by casting a stone, but by living in harmony with nature, you'll change together. This is presented beautifully both visually and at the climax as the score perfectly swells to this revelation for her. F's previous inaction does not affect her ability to help now, even though she was apprehensive. Her past failures do not define her, and when presented with an opportunity to act, she seizes it instead of putting up barriers like the stone in the river. Surrendering to nature, or more commonly in Star Wars, the will of the Force, an individual is no longer clouded by their obsession with the past or even the future, Anakin. I think F's transformation throughout this film perfectly encapsulates the internal struggles of characters we have seen throughout Star Wars. Luke's fear of what he will become, Anakin's fear of the future and the ones he cares for, Ahsoka's self-worth and purpose in life, Rex's outlook on war and being a soldier, and truly what is he fighting for, even Maul's addiction to revenge. All of these characters, and many more, are faced with key moments of self-reflection, whether it be a dark side cave or just a simple crossroads. The Force frames these well, but as I mentioned, this is not strictly a theme among Force users. The philosophy of the Force and the self is ever present in Star Wars, and I think The Village Bride portrays it simply but expertly. While obviously all the characters in every story have internal struggles, and that isn't inherently Star Wars, I believe the concept of the Force, looking within yourself, and the light side and dark side are innovative and belong to Star Wars all its own. I think this universe frames them better than any others. Number 2, selflessness. Sticking to the theme of the self, Star Wars consistently creates this duality of motives, selfishness versus selflessness. Ones in the galaxy concerned with their own motives find their path in the dark side, while those who put others first find their salvation in the light. Now, of course, too much of one thing is never good, and this is framed by Anakin's struggle to protect everyone selflessly, which eventually leads to his fall. But the beauty of Star Wars is that it's all in the balance. Hey yo, there's my name. The villagers in their own ways all exemplify their desire to be selfless. The bride and her husband offer themselves to protect the village and the elders that live within it, while the bride's sister bands a group together to protect the village through action. Both are potential paths for selflessness, with neither of them being wrong, showing that selflessness can come in many forms. F's discussion with the bride in the woods is really the turning point for her. The bride approaches her about giving herself up for the safety of the village. F is very hesitant that it would even help, and the bride simply acknowledges their mutual connection to the Force, even though F seems detached at this point. And the bride simply says, "I won't be alone." Now, of course, she's referring to her husband. They're both going to give themselves up, but she sensed that F would also assist when the time is right. And I believe F took that to heart and knew what she meant as well. F begins her journey only concerned with her own struggles and hesitates to assist the village. By the end, she sheds her past and her self-loathing and helps those who cannot protect themselves, a true sign of the Jedi. I do love how perfect a response F has to violence at the end. She only intervenes when someone is in danger and only uses force to protect and does not use it to kill. She draws her weapon only when necessary and only inflicts violence precisely, with a classic Star Wars hand chop off. It accentuates how a Jedi should act as a peacekeeper, not a warrior or soldier. I think F perfectly embodies a Jedi in her last act, standing up to tyranny, protecting innocence, and giving hope through wisdom in the form of her speech and action. The scene is really beautiful. Characters throughout Star Wars obviously show this theme. Ahsoka in her journey with her famous quote, "In my life, when you find people who need help, you help them, no matter what." Mando's changed throughout the series to protect Grogu and others around him and not being out for himself. Luke throwing away his lightsaber to protect his father at the end of Return of the Jedi. Han Solo returning at the end of A New Hope to save Luke even though he'd already gotten his money and has been paid off. The list goes on and on. Selflessness, I would argue, might be the most important theme in Star Wars. Number 3, generational. It's almost synonymous with Star Wars at this point. Star Wars has become like a family heirloom that you pass down from generation to generation, from parents to kids and on and on and on. Real life is like perfectly imitated art when it comes to Star Wars. In The Village Bride, the generational concepts are a constant. From F going to the planet of her master to search for answers or guidance, to the Village Bride offering herself before the elders of the village, to the physical planet itself. I love when the setting plays an active role in the theme. The planet is shown as being scarred by the past and still remaining resilient through it all. Through the generational connections and teachings of the village, nature, and even her new mentor who imbues his wisdom onto her, F is able to observe and learn to accept herself. I will expand on this concept of learning in the next point. I don't really need to explain how Star Wars is generational to you all. It's kind of second nature at this point, but it is something that is intrinsic to Star Wars that I don't think will or can be replicated, and why Star Wars will be around forever. It is our modern mythology at this point. Number 4, continual teaching, failure, and learning. Tagging along to generational and self-reflection themes, failure and continual learning are a pillar of Star Wars. F's previous failure does not allow her to move forward, and it haunts her. It clings to her to the point where she sits idly by as like a pessimist. During all of her conversations with her new mentor, she's like, "Oh, this is silly. What am I doing here?" The only thing that brings her back is when her new mentor, a generation older and wiser, urges her to act and get out from this dark place of regret. Her master even continues teaching her subconsciously by her going to his home world. So to some degree, he's continually teaching her as well. The planet teaches her through imagery of past generations and being resilient even in the face of change. Tying together generational teaching to learn from failure is something that is inherent to Star Wars. And I love how Star Wars does not always go one way with this concept. The older generation has a lot to offer the younger generation, but that gets reciprocated just as much back upwards. Luke and Rey learning from each other, Luke and Yoda and Obi-Wan, Ahsoka and Anakin, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, all of these relationships are two-way roads where the master and the student are always continually learning from one another. I think Generations is much more than just family lineage in Star Wars. It is the connection of the old and the young for the betterment of both sides. The Village Bride takes this concept in stride, and F learns from her master, her new mentor, the young villagers and their spirit to fight, and of course, nature and the planet itself. Number 5, hope. You knew this one was coming. Star Wars and hope is almost like a meme at this point, but they go together so well. You can't have one without the other. Whether it's a hope for a better future for the characters and their loved ones, or simply hope for a better self, hope is a staple of Star Wars media. In The Village Bride, F's hope is restored by watching her surroundings and the people she interacts with. In that, she is able to act and save the ones who taught her that hope, which then reciprocates into them hoping for a more peaceful future on their planet without rule or oppression. F's hope was diminished by her past, but in that moment where she takes her mask off and she finally reveals herself, she's a shining beacon of hope, especially when she ignites her lightsaber. You also have to think that F's journey to the planet in the first place was spurred by just a bit of hope. Though it comes off as exile, as all great Jedi do, part of her hoped to find answers here on her master's homeworld. Not overt hope that hits you over the head, but a faint, subtle hope that eventually gets ignited. Once again, I don't need to explain to you or tell you about hope in Star Wars. The first movie is called A New Hope. But true Star Wars leans into this concept so well. Something about hope framed in the Star Wars galaxy far, far away is special. And finally, you thought I'd forget about this? Music. Yes, this was just to rave about how beautifully done this score was. While I liked the other short films, and I think they all had wonderful music, this piece stuck out so much. It is truly memorable and unique compared to many other Star Wars pieces, and at the same time, I think the use of an angelic voice, or simply voice as an instrument, calls back to my favorite Star Wars score, Revenge of the Sith, while that was much, much darker. I believe the space opera genre, lends itself to these vocal score pieces. I think there is something to be said when a piece of media blends its music so well into its story to the point where you can't even separate them anymore. This was the only short film where a moment was specifically highlighted by the music. All of your favorite Star Wars moments, you can not only visually imagine them, but you could probably hum the music that was happening at the time of the scene. And I think The Village Bride nails the spirit of Star Wars in this case, and makes the moment when F ignites her lightsaber and says, "I am a Jedi," one of my favorite moments in recent memory from Star Wars. Oh, sorry, she says, "Watashi wa Jedi," which was so badass. I've been waiting to hear that. And if you haven't already, go back and rewatch this with Japanese dialogue and watch with subtitles. I can't recommend it enough, and I know it was weird how Disney Plus set it up. Like, Japanese wasn't one of the first languages you could switch to, even though that was the original language it was recorded in. I don't know. But go back and watch in Japanese. I can't recommend it enough. It's awesome. I constantly, I religiously rewatch just that moment and the moment of her speech because it just gives me chills, mostly because of the score. I mean, the dialogue's great, but the score is so beautiful. By the way, if you didn't know, the whole score is available on streaming, so I highly recommend checking it out. Magina Times the Force is the track you are looking for, I promise, but the opening track of the album is also amazing as well. So there you have it, the prescription for the future of all Star Wars projects, perfectly packaged by the simplistic and the surprisingly not so Star Wars-centric story of The Village Bride. If you couldn't tell, this was my favorite film in Visions, and I truly hope it gets recognized for how well it captures the Star Wars themes without shamelessly portraying itself as a Star Wars story. And at the time of recording this, I actually found out that The Village Bride was submitted to the Oscars for their consideration for the short film category. So if that gets a nomination, I would be amazed, but I really think it deserves it, honestly. And see, I have good taste. I was making this episode before that even came out, so some more cred for me, huh? And once again, I have not spoken to the creators, so all of my assumptions may be completely off, and it's all just a coincidence. But I would be very surprised if it was. I think it is really well calculated. The steps they take to almost commit to a Star Wars story and then pull it back, I think it's all very much a part of the experience, and I absolutely love the experience itself. And also, art is about interpretation, so this is my thoughts, and this is how I interpreted the art, so that's what it is. To be honest, I would love to interview one of the people that worked on this. I don't care if it was an animator, a storyboard artist, whatever. Being able to pick their brain and see if this really was their vision from the beginning. I said vision. Damn it. To see if this really was their vision from the beginning to tell the story in this particular way, it would be so cool to hear, but at the same time, that might ruin the fun. So, I don't know, but maybe I'll reach out. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about putting together a nice professional note or email or DM or whatever and put that together for you guys, but we'll see, maybe. Other just one-off things I really liked in this, obviously the animation was gorgeous. I love the vibrant colors. I love the close-ups. They had this kind of like sand grain to the characters. I don't know how to describe it, but I really like that. I love F's design. At the end when her heels like open up and she takes up that like samurai traditional stance of about to attack and then she like zooms and it cuts to black. I absolutely love that. I respect the yellow lightsaber. I like how it actually looks like a sword. So there was a lot of just cool details I liked as well. But I had so much fun, breaking down this episode into such granular detail. I've actually talked longer than the length of the film, which is hilarious. But let me know if you guys want to hear my thoughts on the other Vision short films. I don't think I would be able to go into this much detail about all of them. It would just kind of be reactions, what I like, what I didn't like. But if you guys want that, I'd be down. I liked a lot of these episodes, and I'd be open to talking about them more. So if you do want to hear that, let me know on my Instagram at @star_wars_mark of balance. DM me. I love hearing from you guys. I like interacting with you guys. I love when people send me stuff, either it's memes, news, or Legos. I love the community. It's awesome to hear from you guys. So yeah, just reach out. But with that, thank you as always for listening. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I liked making it. Self-reflection, selflessness, generational, continual teaching, failure, and learning, hope, and music. That's Mark of Balance's 6 keys to Star Wars going forward. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Magina, may you rise. And of course, may the Force be with you. Thanks. Peace.